everyone, in today's video we'll be working on 5 holiday inspired art and drawing ideas. This video is a collaboration with Visual Mind, and once you finish this video you can head over to her channel and find another 5 festive art ideas to inspire you. I'm going to be using a Pink Pig sketchbook today and an assortment of supplies, including this fun candy cane pencil, and I'll leave a list of all the supplies in the description box below, but you can use whatever supplies you have on hand to follow along. So grab your sketchbook and a warm drink and let's get started. This first page I'll be working on a festive holly wreath. Holly leaves are very simple to draw. I like to start by drawing a curved line to indicate the centre of the leaf, and then drawing out the 2 outer edges using a line that's made up of little pyramids or little mountains. And that is a simple holly leaf. Then for the berries, I draw a series of small circles. I like to layer up the circles, so I start with one in front and then I draw a few of them nestled behind. I also draw smaller circles inside the berries as well. And that is how I draw a simple holly cluster, a curved line for the inside of the holly leaf and then 2 outer lines with these little mountains, and I also like to curve the lines out from the base and then taper them inwards towards the top of the leaf. So to start on the wreath, I began by tracing a circle and then I drew a small bow at the bottom and used the circle lines as a guide. I filled in the wreath with lots of holly leaves and berries. The wreath design could be easily adjusted and filled with whatever shapes you want: pine cones, candy canes, pine branches, Christmas tree baubles. Drawing the circle down first will help to keep the wreath the right shape, and then you can easily customize it and draw whatever you want to make up your wreath. And I like to start with one side and draw the holly out up one side of the circle and then go back to the bow again and then draw the holly up the other side of the circle so that the 2 holly sides meet in the middle at the top. I also like to place a few leaves coming out at different angles here and there, just so that the wreath is not too symmetrical and perfect looking. Once the sketch is finished, it's time to outline the design. Now, depending on how you plan to colour, you might decide to skip this step and outline after colouring. The liner that I'm using here is both waterproof and Copic proof, so the lines will not smudge or run when I colour, so I can outline at this point. I like to go round the whole wreath and trace my sketch lines, and then I rub out the pencil sketch underneath, and to add a little bit more dimension to the line work, I like to go back in and thicken up the outside lines of the wreath and then the inside lines of the wreath. This helps to make the line art look a little bit more interesting. I added colour to the wreath with watercolours and then simply colour blocked in the leaves, the berries and the ribbon. For the ribbon I used metallic gold paint, and that has a little bit of a shimmer, and I also added in a little dark blue into the blank spaces between the holly leaves and the berries. This helps to give the wreath a little bit more depth. Once the first layer of watercolour was dry, I added a few extra lines in the leaves and dabs of darker red into the berries just to add a few shadows. I did the same process to the bow and then finally added a little bit of white paint in dabs all over the wreath to give a little sparkle. And that is the holly wreath page. It's an easy design to customize and it would look really nice on a Christmas card, I think. For this next page we're going to be using washi tape, and this lovely set was sent to me to test out by Mozart Supplies. This video is not sponsored by them, but they did send me this set of tapes to try out and I thank them for supporting this channel. I think this set is a really pretty collection of designs. There are some glittery tapes, ones that have metallic gold sections, and just a really nice range of colours and different elements on the tapes. You can of course use whatever washi tape you have at home, and the idea here is to draw a group of gifts and then to colour the gifts in using the washi tape. I started out by sketching in the different presents. I like to vary the size and the shape of the parcels just to make the composition a bit more interesting, and I also like to stack them as well. So I like to have some in the foreground and then some behind, just so that there is nice variation throughout the design. Once the sketches were finished, I then outlined the shapes with the same sepia liner that I had been using earlier, and I rubbed out the pencil lines once the outlines were dry. I picked one of the washi tape designs and laid down a strip over the first present. I'm using an X-Acto knife to cut and trim the washi tape. These knives are very sharp and you need to be very careful when using them, so I wouldn't recommend this particular page for children. I used the same process for all the gifts, placing a strip of tape down and then cutting around and trimming off whatever parts of the tape that I didn't need. You will want not to press too hard when you're cutting around your design, as you don't want to cut right through the paper. I layered up the tape in several places to work round some of the more difficult shapes, and I left all the ribbons showing, but if you wanted to make this cutting process a little easier, then leaving out the ribbons and bows when you're sketching would make the trimming much simpler. I used 6 different tape designs and I duplicated a couple of them throughout the page. After the washi tape was finished, I took a couple of light grey coloured pencils and added a few shadows to the bows and ribbons, and also added a drop shadow under the pile of gifts just to anchor them to the page. So that's the washi tape gift ideas, and it's a fun way to use washi tape in your sketchbooks, and it's a nice way to use up some of the washi tape that you might already have around with your supplies. And if you're interested in looking at these particular tapes, they can be found from Mozart Supplies. For page 3, we'll be working on a candy cane and holly leaves pattern. So we looked earlier at drawing out holly leaves, but for the candy canes you want to draw a shape that looks a lot like an upside down letter J, and then simply draw in the stripes. I like to practice drawing the elements out first, either on a scrap piece of paper or on another page of my sketchbook, just so that I can get a hang of how to put the shapes together before I add them to my final design. I want the pattern to have a white border, so I'm starting out by using some washi tape to create a frame around the page. This is where having a spiral bound sketchbook can be a little awkward, I find, but I just covered over the spirals with the tape and it still worked fine in creating a border all the way around the pattern. I started by drawing out a load of candy canes, and I drew them overlapping each other, some going off the page, and I tried to vary the angles and the orientation of the candy canes as much as possible to give the pattern lots of movement. Then under the layer of candy canes I drew in clusters of holly leaves and berries. The candy cane are the foreground of the pattern, and then the holly leaves are in the background, and then behind the holly leaves there'll be a coloured background as well. So this pattern has 3 layers, and it's important to keep these layers in mind when sketching and when inking. I also made sure to vary the angles and direction of the holly clusters as well, and to also make sure there was plenty of elements going off the sides of the page. Once the outlines were done and the pencil lines were rubbed out, I started colouring. I used a dark blue for the background colour, and I coloured in all the background sections first. If I'm using a dark background colour, I like to place that colour down first and then work on the lighter colours afterwards. I chose a dark, cool blue background colour so that the warmer reds would really pop out later on when I add them to the pattern. For the candy canes and the berries, I used a selection of reds. I laid the lightest colour down first and then used 2 darker shades to add some shadows to the outer edges of the candy canes and the berries. I then blended all the colours together using the lightest shade once more. I like to work in colour families on designs like this and finish one set of colours before moving on to the next. For the leaves, I used a couple of greens and used the same blending and shading process. I also added a little cool grey to the edges of the white sections of the candy cane to add a little shadow. The final step was to use a white coloured pencil to add a little textured shine to the candy canes and berries, and that is the candy cane patterned page. For the next design, we'll be drawing and decorating a series of hanging ornaments or Christmas tree baubles. To draw these, you start with a simple circle, then add a little rectangle bit on top, and then the little hanging attachment, and then draw a line of ribbon for them to hang on. This design would also make a very nice holiday card composition as well. I started by scattering 5 ornaments across my page, again varying the size and the placement, and I also went for 5 ornaments because I find working in odd numbers of elements tend to work best on pages like this. And then once I'd drawn in the ornaments, I could then go in and decorate them, and you can really decorate your own ornaments however you like and use whatever combination of stripes and circles and swirls. You could draw faces in your ornaments, you could replicate some of the ornaments you actually have hanging up in your house. You can really have a lot of fun and customize the ornaments however you like. I also added in a strip to the background as I wanted to anchor the ornaments to the page. I then outlined and then added the colours. I went for some blues and purples for mine, but you can use whatever colours you like. For the background strips, it's best to go for either a much darker colour than the ornaments or a much lighter colour, just so the ornaments stand out enough. You could also add in some glitter or metallic pens to your ornaments and make them a little bit more sparkly. I added a little shine to each bauble with a white coloured pencil, and that finished off the page. For the last page, we'll be creating a Ponseti flower painting. I love buying these red holiday plants every year and they're lots of fun to draw as well. I'm starting by drawing out the inner yellow flowers because the red parts of the Ponseti are actually the leaves. The flowers are the very little yellow or light green buds that are in the centre of the plant. I like to make all the leaves different shapes and not to make the flower symmetrical looking. I find it looks more natural if the leaves are varied. I drew a couple of smaller leaves at the centre coming out from the flowers and then carried on outwards, making the leaves a little bit bigger as I went. I also added a few sprigs of buds and grasses to the composition as well, just to add a little bit of interest at the top and the bottom of the arrangement. I then drew a strip down the centre of the page. These strips are of course optional and I like to include them on these compositions because as I mentioned earlier, they help to complete the page and to anchor the floating objects on the page. If you don't like the look of them, then you don't have to include them and you can leave out any of the steps or any of the elements out of these pages when you're working on your own. These tutorials are after all just meant to be a bit of inspiration and you can adapt the pages and ideas to suit your own style. I then outlined the entire composition and added a slightly thicker line around the outside of the plant just to add a little bit of interest to the line art, and then I started to fill in the colour. The watercolours I'm using here are a little bit more opaque than regular watercolours, so the paint is going on a little bit thicker than normal, but any paints will work for colouring this in. I used yellows and light green for the flowers in the centre and also for the buds on the outside, and then I used a mix of reds and greens for the leaves. I layered up the paint and worked all over the painting at once, leaving one section to dry whilst I worked on another section. I coloured in the background strip with a pale blue, and once everything was dry I used a few coloured pencils to darken up some of the shadows, to put the veining back in the leaves again. I originally put the veining in with the outliner, but by the time I'd added several layers of paint it wasn't so visible, so I used a red and a green coloured pencil to go in and add in that veining again. And I also added a layer of yellow coloured pencil over all the leaves to give them a warm highlight. The final step was to use a little white gesso to add in a few touches of white highlights onto the Ponseti flower, and that completed the Ponseti page. As I mentioned earlier, this video is a holiday collaboration with Visual Mind. We've collaborated before a couple of months back on a Halloween themed video collaboration, and we thought it'd be really fun to do a holiday themed collaboration this time. And if you haven't checked out her channel, you can find a link in the description box below, as well as a link to her channel in the iCard section of this video. She has a really lovely art channel and she makes watercolour painting tutorials and reviews, as well as sketchbook videos and lots of drawing ideas videos as well. Her half of the collab will be up now and you can find a few more holiday drawing ideas over on her channel, so thank you Visual Mind for collaborating with me again. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. Which one of these pages did you like best? Feel free to ask any questions down below and subscribe and hit the notification bell if you'd like to be notified whenever I post a new video. Have a creative day everyone, and I will see you next time.